What would be your worst nightmare?
In Britain.
Be whoever, whatever you want to be.
But you have to understand that it's not that easy. An empire never dies. It merely becomes a confederation, a commonwealth of many countries. It is easier to run an empire that way. It could be also multi-beneficial for all the parties involved and the countries. Heaven knows it's hard enough to run a whole country, let alone an empire. The Roman Empire never died. No, it never died. And the Pax Romana, it became the Catholic Church. And its capital is in Rome. It's a different kind of empire, but it's an empire. And the British Empire never died. It's the Commonwealth. And the Queen of England is still the head of the entire state.
Despite the support that the two-party system was getting from the electorate, as I said, about 90% of all the votes cast either went for the Conservative government or the Labour Party, the opposition, something was brewing. Two things which were come to dominate and to lead to a battle, a bitter battle, between the different wings of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. In the 50s, there was an outright war between the Gateskinites, who were centre-right in the Labour Party, and the much more left-wing wing led by Anaya and Bevan. This battle was a bitter battle, but it did not, at this stage, lead to a split in the Labour Party. It was, if you like, a quiet civil war going on, or not so quiet civil war, but it did not lead to the institutionalised split of the Labour Party. That split was to come in the 80s, but its seeds were sown in the 50s. Likewise, on the Conservative side, in the post-war period and in the 1950s, something else was going on, which would come to the fore with great bitterness in the 80s. And that was the battle between, on the one hand, the One Nation Tories and the Free Marketeers. Free Marketeers, who were to come to the fore and actually to dominate in the run-up to the referendum in Britain in the 90s and noughties. The battle lines were drawn in the 50s. The battle lines were these. The pro-European One Nation Tories, led by people like Edward Heath, were very much in favour of Britain being part of the European project. And they very much were in control of the party in the 50s and 60s. However, there was always a deep strain within the party who did not believe in the great European project. They felt that it was giving up too much sovereignty and power and control of Britain's government to Europe. This division, its seeds sown in the 50s, was to burst into life when, first of all, Heath becomes Conservative Prime Minister in 1970 and takes Britain into Europe, and when Margaret Thatcher becomes Prime Minister and she leads the argument ferociously, no, 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 that Britain must not give up its sovereignty, power and control. As we go through then, in the 60s, the dominance of the pro-Europeans in the Conservative Party was to begin to come unstuck in spectacular fashion when Margaret Thatcher wins the 1979 general election. She won it in the most extraordinary of circumstances: the winter of discontent, the collapse of the British political system's consensus. She was an ardent pro-marketeer who fought for and pursued an absolutely unbending policy, no U-turns, the ladies not for turning, of pro-market, free market economics. Having taken the party strongly in that road and having won 3 elections, Margaret Thatcher then turned her attention to her opposition to what the left of the Conservative Party, the One Nation Tories, had so cherished, which was the European project. Thatcher famously denounced the European project because she saw it, by the time of her period of power, she saw it as something which had become a monster that was going to take away British sovereignty, self-government, power and control. That argument was to come further to the fore when David Cameron, in the 2015 period, first of all fights an election offering to have a referendum on Britain's membership of Europe, believing that they would win. He was very pro-European, only to lose spectacularly. He wins the election, and then he calls the referendum. The referendum shows that the British public had had enough. The British public voted in that referendum to put a stop to what had come to be seen as Europe grabbing control of British affairs and stealing British sovereignty. And they wanted, most of all, an end to the free movement of labour and what they saw as uncontrolled immigration. It was a bitter blow to the pro-Europeans, both in the Conservative Party and in the Labour Party. Both the pro-European wing of the Conservative Party and the pro-European wing of the Labour Party were convinced that the British public would vote in favour of remaining an integral part of Europe. They didn't do so. The reason was quite simple. It was immigration. The country had had enough of what it saw as unplanned immigration, concentrating in areas that were struggling to absorb the level of immigration. The Conservative Party, the pro-Europeans, allowed the referendum to turn into a referendum on immigration.
You can walk around and jog around London in the nude, and no one will arrange for you. You can cycle around in many parts of Britain in the nude. In fact, groups of cyclists cycle very often together. I always wondered, always worn black, sometimes white pajamas in the streets, and these days it's the norm. You can be dressed as a gorilla or a giraffe and no one will arrest you. In fact, I don't seem to see any police patrols in the streets anymore. People pretend to be so many people. ID thefts are bigger in Britain than anywhere else in the world, but somehow, in the end, there's always a way to sort it out. After the damage has been done, of course, you have to go through a lot of trauma before things can settle. We have allowed people to be dressed the way they like. Women wearing a burqa, which could be terrifying to some. Plus, I've came across, they were my next door neighbor, and I live, well, not next door, 3 streets down the road, past the post office, but they were a family of ISIS members, and let's not forget who they are. And they were walking around their families, and their outstanding outfit, it has to be said, all black, all covered, and the men they were wearing their flags behind their back or something. And I've seen them a few times in the streets, and they were all looking very alarming there to me. I mean, it was just a little bit frightening. But I thought the fashion was actually astounding. However, it was a bit distressing to see them walking in groups of people, and you can't see the woman because she's all covered in black. But they all sort of, I like this fashion, but it means so many things that are terrifying. And that's not the very first time I've seen people like that. I think I've probably seen them about 5 or 6 times. Especially what they represent. I didn't think they could be allowed, but, be whatever you want to be. And it's sometimes freedom perhaps went too far, but we believe in freedom, but some freedom may not be so compatible with mine.
My name is Kieran Wallace. I'm 29 years old. I'm from South London. I grew up in Brixton. I'm currently residing in Kennington, which is where my mum lives. I'm one of 5, the eldest of my mum's children. I was in care for most of my childhood. I was in long-term foster care. I got 4 other siblings that were all adopted on my mum's side, and my dad's got many children. I'm in the middle. But yeah, I grew up in South London from about the age of, probably about 4. I'd say about from 4 years old, I was out and about. So I grew up very quickly. I was around older children. I learned about, the street life, and my parents were heavily influenced at the time in drugs. They were selling drugs. My dad was selling drugs. My mum was taking drugs, and my dad was smoking weed. And so I learned about all of those things very quickly. I've been through some traumatic past. I had a sort of abusive situation going on when I was a child. Not directly, but there was basically a sex offender who was around the house. It was like a lodger in my grandma's house, and that affected me quite early because I had to watch my cousins, my female cousins, I had to watch them come to some abuse, and then luckily I stood up to them, and kind of got wrapped up in the end. But yeah, towards the end of that, I sort of grew out of that, and like I said, I went into foster care. I was the last to go. In my foster placement, I was with my sisters, my 2 younger sisters. I got introduced quite quickly into church, and from young I've always had a relationship with God. I wouldn't call myself religious so much now, but I grew up as a Christian, So I'm a spiritual person, and believe heavily in God. So yeah, growing up in my foster placements, there wasn't much turmoil going on there. Luckily for me, because we have some people that go through like foster homes and get abused and stuff. So I had it quite lucky. I was with a woman who was her first. She was new at the. She just applied to be a foster carer. So I was her first child, and she had me for a long term, for 18 years. So I come out of foster care when I was 18.